Michael's keys hitting our marble kitchen counter echoed through the house. I knew that sound. It was his way of announcing he was upset again. I stood at the sink, trying to finish the dishes before the inevitable storm broke. "Sarah, where are my car keys?" His voice carried that familiar edge of controlled anger. "The ones I always keep by the front door?" I took a deep breath before turning around. Michael stood there in his pristine white doctor's coat, every inch the respected hospital administrator. His perfectly combed hair and pressed clothes starkly contrasted my messy ponytail and simple work attire. "I moved them to the key hook we installed last week," I replied quietly. "You agreed it would be more organized." His laugh was sharp, cutting. "Of course you did, because you always know better, don't you? Even though you can barely organize your real estate showings." I dried my hands slowly, buying time. 5 years of marriage had taught me to recognize the signs. This wasn't about keys. It never was. "I was just trying to help," I offered, hating how small my voice sounded. "Help?" Michael ran his hands through his hair, messing up his perfect styling. "Like you help by consistently embarrassing me at hospital functions? Like you help by failing to close any significant property sales? Do you know what it's like, Sarah? Having to constantly explain to my colleagues why my wife is so mediocre?" The word hung in the air between us. Mediocre. His favorite description of me lately. "I closed the Peterson listing last week," I said, trying to inject some strength into my voice. The $300,000 sale had been my biggest this month. He scoffed. "The Petersons? Sarah, I have residents who could afford that house. When I married you, I thought you had potential. You'd grow, develop, and become someone worthy of standing beside me. Instead." He gestured at me dismissively. "I am beginning to think marrying you was the biggest mistake of my life." There it was. The truth was that he'd been dancing around for months. "You are just not good enough," he continued, his voice softer now, almost pitying. "Not for someone like me, not for the life I am trying to build, and honestly, I don't think you ever will be." I stood there, dishes forgotten, watching my husband of 5 years explain why I was insufficient. But something was different this time. Instead of the usual hurt, I felt a strange calm settling over me. "Is that what you think?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "It's what I know," he replied, already turning away, dismissing me as always. "I'll be late tonight. Try not to mess anything else up before I get home." As his footsteps faded, I looked around our expensive kitchen, filled with appliances he'd chosen, decorated in colors he'd picked, and for the first time, I smiled. "You think I am not good enough for you, Michael?" I thought. "Let's see about that." The kettle whistled sharply, pulling me from my thoughts. As I made my evening tea, the only part of my nightly routine Michael hadn't criticized yet, memories from the past 5 years played through my mind like a carefully edited movie. I met Michael at a hospital fundraiser where I was helping my real estate firm set up promotional materials. Back then, I was known for my outgoing personality and colorful style. That Sarah wore bright dresses and laughed too loudly, according to Michael. Sarah had dreams of opening her real estate agency someday. "You have a beautiful smile," he'd said during our first conversation. "But maybe tone down the laugh? It's a bit unprofessional." I should have seen it then. The way he packaged criticism as care, wrapped control in the guise of help. But he was handsome, successful, and seemed to see potential in me. I mistook his criticism for guidance, his control for protection. The changes started small. My loud wardrobe became more muted. Professional, he called it. The dream of my agency became unrealistic. Better to stay at my current firm where expectations were manageable. My circle of friends shrank as he found fault with each one. "Jessica's too aggressive in her career," he'd say. "Katie's divorce shows poor judgment. Do you want to associate with people like that?" One by one, they fell away, replaced by his colleagues' wives, quiet, well-dressed women who spoke softly and deferred to their husbands, women who Michael pointed out as examples I should follow. My sales numbers dropped as my confidence dwindled. Each show became an exercise in anxiety, his voice in my head critiquing every word, every gesture. "Don't be too pushy," he'd coach. "Nobody likes an aggressive woman." The irony was, I used to be one of my firm's top performers. I stirred my tea, remembering last month's hospital gala. I'd spent hours getting ready, following his detailed instructions about my hair, makeup, and dress. But somehow, it still wasn't enough. "Your lipstick is too bright," he'd whispered harshly as we entered. "And did you gain weight? The dress is pulling at the waist." Later, when a colleague asked about my work, Michael jumped in before I could answer. "Sarah's content in her little corner of real estate," he'd said, his hand tight on my waist. "Not everyone needs a high-powered career." The colleague's wife had given me a look I now recognized, pity mixed with understanding. How many other women stood in inexpensive dresses at fancy parties, their husbands' fingers leaving invisible bruises on their confidence? Our wedding photo hung in the hallway, me in white, him in black, both smiling. I looked at it every day, watching as the young woman in the photo slowly disappeared. The woman who closed million-dollar deals, who planned charity events, who had opinions and voiced them. Now I barely recognized her. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Make sure you review those conversation topics I sent for tomorrow's dinner party. Try not to embarrass me this time." I picked up my tea and walked to our home office, his space though I was allowed to use it. Opening his meticulously organized desk drawer, I found the stack of self-improvement articles he'd been collecting for me. The top one read, "How to be a better corporate wife." Something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the key argument this morning. Maybe it was 5 years of accumulated comments. Or maybe, finally, it was time for that bright, loud Sarah to come back. I opened my laptop and typed, "How to leave an emotionally abusive marriage." Sarah? Sarah Mitchell? I looked up from my coffee, startled to hear my maiden name. Katie Preston, now Katie Chen according to her business suit's nameplate, stood before me looking nothing like the poor divorced failure Michael had labeled her as. "I almost didn't recognize you," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "What happened to your signature red lipstick and those amazing blazers?" I tugged self-consciously at my beige sweater. Michael approved, naturally. "Life happened, I guess." Katie's eyes narrowed, seeing more than I wanted her to. "Life? Or marriage to Dr. Control Freak?" The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm. "Michael's just particular," I defended weakly. "He wants what's best for me." "Really?" Katie leaned forward. "Is that why one of the top real estate agents in our firm now barely closes any sales? Because it's best for you?" Her words hit like a physical blow. I remembered the morning's conversation about the keys, Michael's declaration that I wasn't good enough. 5 years of similar conversations crashed over me. "I have a friend," Katie said quietly, watching my face. "She's a therapist who specializes in emotional abuse recovery." "I am not." I started automatically. "When was the last time you decided without hearing his voice in your head?" She cut in. "When was the last time you wore something he hadn't approved? Spoke without screening your words? Felt good enough?" My hand shook as I reached for my coffee. "He's never hit me." "Bruises fade," Katie replied. "But believing you are worthless? That scars run deep, Sarah." I thought about the morning's real estate listings I'd browsed, all modest homes because Michael insisted I match my client's level. About the promotion I'd declined last year because he said it would disturb our home dynamic. "Preston Real Estate is looking for a senior agent," Katie mentioned casually. "The kind who used to close million-dollar deals before she started believing she couldn't." "I can't," I whispered. "Michael would never." "That's exactly the point," she interrupted. "What Michael would never allow. What about what Sarah wants?" After Katie left, I sat there for a long time, her business card burning a hole in my purse. That evening, instead of going home, I drove to the park where I used to practice my sales pitches before Michael convinced me it was unseemly. I made 3 calls. 1. To Katie's therapist friend, scheduling an appointment. 2. To my bank, inquiring about opening a separate account. 3. To Preston Real Estate, requesting an interview. My phone buzzed. "Michael, where are you? Dinner's getting late." Looking at his message, I felt the familiar anxiety rise. But something else rose with it. Anger. Clear, clean anger that burned away the fog of self-doubt. That night, I started a journal documenting every criticism and every controlling behavior. I photographed the improvement articles he collected for me, recorded his helpful comments about my inadequacies. While Michael slept, I started my research, emotional abuse support groups, divorce lawyers, apartment listings. Each tab on my incognito browser felt like a tiny act of rebellion. I created a new email account, bright.sarah@email.com. The first thing I'd named for myself in years. Started forwarding important documents there. Set up automatic transfers of small amounts to a separate account, too small for Michael to notice in our joint account. "Your posture's slipping again," Michael commented at breakfast. "And didn't we agree you'd stick to neutrals? That blue shirt is attention-seeking?" I lowered my eyes submissively, a practiced gesture. But inside, I was making another list. Contact a divorce lawyer. View apartments in Preston Real Estate's district. Buy more blue shirts? "You are right," I murmured. "I'll change." He smiled, satisfied. "See, you can learn. Maybe to hear is hope for you yet." Oh, there was hope all right. Just not the kind he was thinking of. In my purse, Katie's business card sat next to the therapist's appointment card. In my phone, a calendar invite for the Preston real estate interview blinked silently. And in my mind, a plan was taking shape. "You want to see if I am good enough, Michael? Game on." The Preston real estate office gleamed with success. Floor-to-ceiling windows, marble floors, and walls lined with multi-million-dollar listings. Everything Michael would call aspirational in that condescending tone of his. "Your sales record from 5 years ago is impressive," Lisa Preston said, studying my resume. "What happened?" I'd practiced this answer with my therapist. "Life changes, but I am ready to return to that level and exceed it." "With a husband who works at Memorial Hospital?" Lisa raised an eyebrow. "I know the type. Status, conscious, image, focused. How will you handle that conflict?" My hands tightened in my lap. "My marriage and my career are separate entities." Lisa smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her. "Good answer. When can you start?" That night, Michael critiqued my overcooked chicken while I silently celebrated accepting a position that would triple my commission potential. "At least you are consistent in your mediocrity," he sighed. If only he knew. My first week at Preston was like waking up from a long sleep. I stayed late every night, claiming charity committee meetings Michael never bothered to verify. I relearned the luxury market, studied high-end property features, and practiced negotiations. "Your pitch needs work," my new mentor Amanda said after watching me practice. "Stop making yourself smaller. You are selling multi-million-dollar homes, not apologizing for existing." She was right. I'd gotten so used to Michael's corrections that I'd developed verbal tics. "I think maybe, if you don't mind. I could be wrong." Every night, I recorded myself practicing pitches. Every morning, I arrived early to master our CRM system. Michael, absorbed in his hospital politics, noticed nothing except my continued failings at my old firm. "The Hendersons just listed with another agent," he mentioned over dinner, 3 weeks into my new job. "Can't even keep clients in the budget market? Perhaps it's time to consider a different career." I murmured something non-committal while mentally reviewing my upcoming showings at Preston. The truth was, I'd already closed 2 sales that week, both properties worth more than our house. The money went into my secret account. Each deposit felt like storing ammunition. My first major listing came a month in, a $2.8 million lakeside property that would have made Michael choke on his premium coffee. I stood at the grand entrance, preparing for the open house when Lisa appeared. "Big crowd expected," she said. "Sure you can handle it?" 5 years ago, I'd hosted events twice this size, but Michael's voice whispered, "You'll embarrass yourself." I straightened my shoulders. "Watch me." The open house was a triumph. 3 solid offers by closing. I celebrated by buying a red blazer and hiding it in my gym locker. "You are staying late at the gym a lot," Michael observed suspiciously. "Trying to improve myself," I replied. "Like you always wanted." He smiled that superior smile. "Good, you need it." 2 months in, I landed the Wilson account, a family looking for a $5 million estate. The old Sarah would have been intimidated. The new Sarah? She was too busy calculating her commission. "Your numbers are impressive," Lisa said during my performance review. "But you are playing it very quiet. Any reason?" I thought about the divorce papers sitting in my lawyer's office, waiting, About Michael's upcoming hospital fundraiser where he expected his modest wife to play her usual supporting role. Just building momentum, I replied. And I was. Each sale built my confidence. Each client who trusted me chipped away at Michael's voice in my head. Each commission payment padded my escape fund. My phone buzzed during a closing meeting. Michael, don't forget the hospital fundraiser next month. I've laid out appropriate attire suggestions. Try not to embarrass me this time. I typed back, of course, honey. Then returned to explaining million-dollar property features to my clients. That evening, I overheard him on the phone with his mother. Sarah's still struggling professionally, he said. But we knew that would be the case. Some people just aren't meant for success. I bit back a laugh. If only he knew about the offer I'd just closed a $6 million property that would make headlines in the real estate section. If only he knew about my secret bank account, now hefty enough to fund a complete life reset. But he would know. Soon. Because of the fundraiser he was so worried about? It was exactly 1 week after my biggest listing would be announced in the press. Exactly 1 week after Preston Real Estate would name me their top-performing new agent. Exactly 1 week before I'd show him just how successful his mediocre wife could be. In my closet, behind the beige and gray clothes he approved of, the red blazer waited. Like me, it was just biding its time. The gym had become my sanctuary, not because of Michael's constant hints about my weight, but because it was the one place he never visited too many common people for his taste. Your form has improved, my trainer Jake commented as I finished my set. And your confidence, too. I caught my reflection in the mirror, shoulders back, head high, a posture my therapist called taking up space unapologetically. A far cry from the shrinking posture I'd developed at home. I have a good reason to be strong, I replied, thinking of the apartment I'd secretly viewed yesterday. 14th floor, amazing city views, and most importantly, a building where Michael would never think to look. The lease was already signed and paid for with commission money he didn't know about. Each day, I moved one small thing there. Photos, documents, the jewelry my grandmother left me that Michael called tacky. Sarah? A voice called as I left the gym. Jennifer, one of the hospital wives Michael had approved of, stood there in designer workout wear. I hardly recognized you. Just trying to improve myself, I said, using Michael's favorite phrase. Her eyes softened. We should have coffee sometime, without the husbands. Over coffee, Jennifer surprised me. We all see it, you know, the way he treats you, the way you've dimmed your light. I am not dimmed anymore, I replied, thinking of my secret bank account, my growing client list, and my escape plan. Good, she smiled. Because some of us remember the Sarah who organized that charity gala 5 years ago. Before Michael convinced you it was too much responsibility. That Sarah was coming back piece by piece. In therapy, I learned to recognize Michael's manipulation tactics. How he'd isolated me from friends, controlled my appearance, and criticized my achievements until I stopped achieving. It's called gaslighting, my therapist explained, making you doubt your reality. But the reality was becoming crystal clear. While Michael worked late, I reconnected with old friends. Katie helped me practice standing up for myself. Jennifer introduced me to her divorce lawyer. Even my mother, who'd always advised trying harder to please him, finally saw the truth. I saw you flinch when he corrected your table manners at Sunday dinner, she said during our weekly lunch. That's not marriage, honey. That's prison. In my new apartment, I created a space that would have horrified Michael. Bright throw pillows, abstract art. A wall of photos showing me with friends, smiling, living. Your hair's getting too long, Michael commented one evening. And you seem distracted lately. Everything okay at your little real estate job? Just trying to be better, I replied, the familiar he tasting different now. Because I was better, stronger, more confident, ready. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa Preston. Wilson Estate closing confirmed. The press release goes out on the morning of the hospital fundraiser. Ready? Another from my lawyer. Divorce papers filed. Ready to serve at your signal. And one from Katie. Apartment furniture delivered. Ready when you are. I looked at Michael across the dinner table, cataloging his familiar expressions, the slight sneer when I spoke, the dismissive gestures, the constant corrections. Once, they had crushed me. Now they just strengthened my resolve. "You seem different lately," he said suspiciously. "Do I?" I smiled, thinking of the red dress hanging in my new apartment, ready for the fundraiser. "I am just becoming who I am meant to be." He had no idea how true those words were, or how soon he'd find out. The hospital fundraiser was 3 days away. My new apartment was ready, the press release was prepared, the divorce papers were filed. All that was left was the grand finale. And oh, what a finale it would be. The morning of the hospital fundraiser arrived with Michael in full control mode. "I've laid out your dress," he announced over breakfast. "The gray one, it's appropriately subtle, and I've made an appointment for your hair. Nothing dramatic, just something acceptable." I nodded, buttering my toast while mentally reviewing my preparations. The red dress waiting in my office. The press release was scheduled for 6 p.m., just as the fundraiser would begin. "The divorce papers are in my lawyer's briefcase. The hospital board will be there," Michael continued, straightening his tie. "Try not to mention your work. Nobody wants to hear about suburban house sales." If only he knew about the $6 million Wilson estate closing, about being named Preston Real Estate's top performer, about the interview scheduled with the city's business journal. "I've made a list of acceptable conversation topics." He pushed a paper across the table. "Stick to these and you might not embarrass me this time." "Whatever you think is best," I replied, the familiar words now tasting like victory. My phone buzzed silently. Lisa. "Press release approved. Ready for 6 p.m. Katie. Your things are moved, keys under the mat. Jennifer. The hospital board is expecting fireworks from someone else tonight. They won't see you coming. Lawyer. In position by 7 p.m. Give the signal." Michael left for work with his usual list of instructions. "Hair appointment at 2. Gray dress. Subtle makeup. Try to remember which fork to use. Don't laugh too loudly." Instead, I headed to Preston Real Estate. "Ready for tonight?" Lisa asked, watching me gather my things. "Born ready," I replied, picking up my office plant, the last item to move to my new apartment. In my car, I had a garment bag containing the red dress that would have given Michael a heart attack. In my purse, copies of the press release that would shock his carefully constructed world. And in my heart, 5 years of suppressed strength, ready to break free. Remember, my therapist had said during our final session, "This isn't about revenge, it's about reclaiming yourself." But as I thought about Michael's smug face, his constant criticism, and his systematic destruction of my confidence, I smiled. Why couldn't it be both? The hospital fundraiser buzzed with energy as I walked in at exactly 6:15 p.m. Not in Michael's approved gray dress, but in a red designer dress that announced my presence before I said a word. Michael's face when he saw me was worth every secret meeting, every hidden preparation, every quiet indignity of the past months. His expression shifted from confusion to anger to forced calm in seconds. "What are you wearing?" he hissed, grabbing my elbow. "And where have you been? I told you to be here at 6. "Handling some press," I replied calmly, gently removing his hand. "You might want to check your phone." As if on cue, his phone buzzed. I watched him read the press release, his face paling. "Preston Real Estate announces record-breaking $6 million sale by rising star agent Sarah Mitchell." "This is a mistake," he said, looking up. "You work at Suburban Homes, small listings. This must be another Sarah." "Actually," Lisa Preston's voice came from behind us. "She's our top performer this quarter. Sarah, the Wilson family is here. They're raving about how you handled their estate purchase." Michael's world was cracking. I could see it in his eyes as other guests approached, not to speak to him but to congratulate me. "Sarah, incredible work on the Wilson estate. We hear Preston's opening a luxury division with you leading it. Michael, you must be so proud of your wife's success." Each comment was a crack in his facade, but I wasn't done. "Honey," he tried again, voice low and dangerous. "What game are you playing?" "No game," I replied, accepting a champagne flute from a passing waiter. "Just becoming good enough. Isn't that what you always wanted?" The hospital board president approached. "Sarah, just reading about your success. And Michael, I assume you'll be joining us at the Wilson estate for next month's charity gala?" Your wife secured it as a venue, quite a coup for the hospital. Michael's hand trembled as he reached for his phone, now buzzing constantly with notifications about his mediocre wife's achievement. We need to leave, he demanded. Now. Actually, I said clearly, making sure nearby guests could hear, I am not going anywhere. But you might want to talk to that gentleman by the door. I believe he has some papers for you. My lawyer stood near the entrance, envelope in hand. Michael's face contorted as realization dawned. You can't do this, he whispered. You are nothing without me. I made you who you are. No, Michael, I replied, my voice carrying in the sudden quiet. You spent years trying to unmake who I am. The only thing you succeeded in doing was giving me the motivation to prove exactly how wrong you were. The room had stilled, watching our drama unfold. 5 years ago, this attention would have mortified me. Now, I stood straighter. The divorce papers are quite clear, I continued calmly. I don't want anything from you. Not the house you chose, not the life you controlled, not even an explanation for years of emotional abuse. I have my success, my own home, my own life. His face was a portrait of rage and disbelief. This isn't over. Actually, I smiled, raising my glass. It is. I am finally good enough, just not for you. And that's the best thing you ever did for me. The room erupted in whispers as my lawyer approached with the papers. Michael's carefully constructed image of the successful man with his supportive, mediocre wife shattered completely. And me? I had never felt more perfectly, wonderfully myself. The silence that followed my words felt like a physical thing, filling the elegant hospital ballroom. Michael stood frozen, divorce papers in his trembling hands, his perfect image cracking like fine china. Is this some kind of joke? He finally managed, but his voice had lost its usual authority. Sarah, you are being hysterical. Let's discuss this at home. My home, I corrected him gently, is no longer with you, and I've never been more clear-headed. Jennifer stepped forward, placing herself slightly between us. I think you should read those papers, Michael, carefully. His eyes darted around the room, finally registering that his audience wasn't on his side. The hospital board members who once laughed at his subtle digs about his simple wife. The colleagues who'd witnessed years of his careful belittlement. They were all watching, and they were all seeing him clearly for the first time. You can't do this, he tried again, his voice rising. Everything you have is because of me. Is that so? Lisa Preston's voice cut through his growing hysteria. Because our records show Sarah's commissions this quarter exceed your annual salary. Not bad for someone you called professionally limited at last month's dinner party. The color drained from his face as several board members exchanged glances. His carefully crafted narrative was unraveling thread by thread. Security, the board president said quietly into his phone. We may need an escort for Dr. Mitchell. That seemed to snap something in Michael. He took a step toward me, his face contorted. You planned this. You deliberately set out to humiliate me. No, Michael, I replied, not backing away. You humiliated yourself. I just stopped hiding it. 2 security guards appeared silently at his sides. The message was clear. Make a scene and lose more than just your wife. Dr. Mitchell, one guard said firmly, please come with us. As they led him away, he kept looking back, as if waiting for me to crumble, to apologize, to beg forgiveness like I had so many times before. Instead, I raised my champagne glass in a small salute. Goodbye, Michael. Thank you for teaching me exactly what I don't want in my life. The room erupted in murmurs as he disappeared through the doors. I felt lighter, taller, more myself than I had in years. Well, Jennifer said, linking her arm through mine, I believe this calls for more champagne. Freedom, I discovered, has its taste. It flavored my coffee in my new apartment that first morning after the fundraiser, where sunlight streamed through uncurtained windows Michael would have called inappropriate. It seasoned every decision I made without hearing his critical voice in my head. The fallout from that night spread through our social circles like wildfire. Michael tried to control the narrative, of course. She's having a breakdown, he told anyone who would listen. The success went to her head. She's become unstable. But the cracks in his facade had been too public, too visible to ignore. His perfectly crafted image had shattered under the bright lights of the hospital fundraiser. He always seemed so professional, One board member's wife confided to me over coffee. But watching him lose control like that? The way he moved toward you? We all saw who he was. At work, my success only accelerated. The Wilson estate sale made headlines, and suddenly my phone wouldn't stop ringing. High-end clients specifically requested the agent who stood up to her controlling husband. I became known not just for my sales record, but for my story. Your confidence, one client told me. It sells more than the houses do. My new apartment became everything Michael had forbidden. Bright artwork dotted the walls. Comfortable furniture invited people to relax rather than perch nervously. Friends dropped by without scheduling appointments 2 weeks in advance. Michael's attempts at reconciliation were predictable. First came the threats. You'll never succeed without me. It'll ruin your reputation. You are making a huge mistake. Then the pleading. I'll change. We can get counseling. I didn't mean those things I said. I forwarded each message to my lawyer without a response. Each desperate attempt at contact only confirmed I'd made the right choice. The divorce proceedings moved quickly, thanks to my preparation. In mediation, Michael tried his old tactics, speaking over me, explaining what my wife means. The mediator, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, shut him down. Mr. Mitchell, she said firmly, your wife is quite capable of expressing herself. Her communication skills seem excellent. I caught his flinch at the word excellent, an adjective he'd never allowed to apply to me. 1 month after the fundraiser, I closed another major sale. The celebration dinner with my team was interrupted by a call from Jennifer. Thought you should know, she said. The hospital board placed Michael on probation. Seems several junior staff members have come forward with complaints about his management style. I wasn't surprised. Bullies rarely limit their targets to just one. That evening, I stood on my balcony, watching the city lights. My phone buzzed with a message from a young agent at my old firm. Can we meet for coffee? I am in a situation like yours was. I smiled, thinking of Katie's coffee shop intervention that had started my journey. Sometimes freedom creates a ripple effect. Absolutely, I texted back. Let me tell you a story about becoming good enough.